Hi everybody, Giselle Grenier here from artplace.ca. So for session 2 of our book of backgrounds, I'm going to create a similar background that I did in session 1, except I'm going to be using acrylics. Now what I also did is I wrapped parchment paper around the set so it would reduce the amount of paint spilling over onto the following page. These pages I really don't care about, to be honest with you, because they're just backgrounds. But this one here, depending on what I'm doing, I may want to have a clean page. Again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. So for the acrylics, again, I'm going to do one page with a gesso base and the other page raw, so you'll be able to see the type of wipeout techniques that you'll be able wipeout effects that you'll be able to get on these. And the paints that I'm using, Decor Traditions, and I'm going to be working more of an underwater scene for this one. Again, these are just backgrounds, and I'm going to show you the technique, and then you can apply it to however you want. I do a lot of talking in these videos because they are technique driven. Okay, I want to gear these to especially to beginners or people that are learning about the techniques, because if you're more advanced, you can always fast forward through the video. Okay, but I do a lot of talking in these. The paints that I'm using are Traditions Phthalo Green Blue, Phthalo Blue, Cerulean Blue, Blue Gray, and Opaque White. And I'm using Opaque White because it's a small bottle. Typically I'll use Titanium White, but I only have the big bottle, and on camera it kind of looks funny. So I have these here. The supplies that I actually end up using will be listed at the end of the video. If you followed my videos, you know that sometimes I'll bring in some extra things, but at the end of the video, in the credits, is what I actually use. I also have some gesso. I've got my paints laid out here in the order that I called them out: Phthalo Green, Phthalo Blue, Cerulean Blue, Blue Gray, and Opaque White. If you don't have cerulean blue, you can make something very, very close by taking a speck. Actually, it'd be easier taking white, adding a speck of phthalo blue and a tiny speck of phthalo green, and mix that up, and you'll get an intense color, but it'll be similar to this. Okay, brushes. I've got a 3/4 and a 1-inch wash glaze brush, and I also have a fan brush. So I'm going to do the same type of background, well, similar, because you'll never get the same background, but I like doing it with a fan brush as well. So I'll introduce that. Let's see what else. So let's see, I've got my grain tone palette paper, brush basin, Clorox wipes, you know, the typical supplies. So the first thing I want to do, because it takes the longest to dry, I have a mosquito bite on my leg and it's just driving me absolutely insane. I'm going to take the gesso, yeah, because it does take the longest time to dry. And I obviously didn't wipe the neck of the cap because everything was dried. Now with this, I'm going to use my fan brush. I'm just going to dip right into here, and I'm just going to roughly put that in. Now I tried to angle the light so you'll see a little bit of glare, so you'll be able to see where the gesso goes. Because it's so white, it's very hard to show on camera on white paper, but you should be able to see a little bit there. And what I'm looking at doing is only leaving this open, so you'll be able to see the technique. Okay, so this is the raw paper, then there's some gesso, just so I can show you some additional things. Okay, then take this and I'm going to put it in water, and that's it for the gesso. Wipe the neck of the bottle first. When you're using watercolors, even if you're using the Traditions paints with the watercolor medium, anything that's watercolor based, water soluble, the layers of paints will mix with each other. Okay, I covered that in the first session. Well, with acrylics, they become permanent. I could have added the watercolor medium to this, but then I wanted to show you the differences by using acrylics with this. Because it's more permanent, you get a much more distressed and aged look. Now, although I am using blues and greens, which is not really the effect of like vintage distress that I'm going for. You just have to change up the colors to whatever you want. Okay? So this has to dry, so I'm going to get started right on this side. So this is a raw side, and I'm going to do some layers of acrylics, and then I'm going to do a wipeout with a stencil. I already know that the wipeout is not going to work on this because there's no resist. There's nothing to repel the paint. In saying that, that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing depending on what you want. What you don't want to try to do is have a stencil on here and wipe so hard that you start pulling up the fiber of the paint. But what I am going to do is, when we get to that point, I'm going to bring in another product, and I'll show you how you can get a nice resist with acrylic paints on raw paper. But a little secret, if you don't have gesso, you can use paint to get the same effect on this side. All right, so I'm going to get my big brush, and now I'm using the Traditions because they are the artist quality paints, and the pigment names and the transparencies that are on the back. If you're using craft paint or the Decor multi-surface satins, just look at the color and you can adjust accordingly. Okay, I'm going to start light to dark, and I'm going to start basically with the cerulean blue. Okay, get a nice wash there. I don't want to add the watercolor medium because I do want this to be permanent. And I'll just put some water in there. And I could have used the extender though, but right now I don't want to extend the drying time. I want this to dry fairly quickly. If you add too much water to the paint, like especially cheap paint, you'll break down the strength of the binder. Okay, we're not going to have a problem with this paint because it's a artist quality paint. And see how it kind of mixes in all together? If you happen to have lines like this, and that's how you keep blending and blending and blending. See, if I do this, you're going to get the lines. That's why I like kind of just laying the paint down, and then it just kind of spreads around. You can also then spray again and slightly tilt your book a little bit, and that'll kind of soften all the paints in together. Now I got some green from the previous background to here, which is right here. I'm not going to worry about it. That's not quite dry yet, but let's just hit this with the heat gun. Acrylics will dry a little bit darker as the moisture evaporates and you're left behind with the pigment. So they do dry a little bit darker. So when it comes to journaling and mixed media, I don't worry about that too much. But when it comes to doing I'm a portraiture artist by profession. I take that into consideration if I'm doing a portraiture of a person or a pet. I do take that into consideration. But when it comes to journaling and stuff like that, I don't care. Okay, let's just... And I'm putting my hand here just to make sure that I can stay there comfortably. That'll ensure that the heat gun is not too close. Oh, I've got a nice little line happening here. Let's see if I can keep that there. Let's hit the gesso side. Now the gesso side must be completely dry, otherwise the paint you'll go put on there, it'll turn chalky if it's wet. In the same respect, if you're doing, like for journaling and mixed media, I don't worry about the drying time. If you're doing a painting that you want to keep for a long time, like a professional type of painting, gesso really needs to cure for 24 hours. And as with everything, always look on the product label for the use of the paint. But when it comes to journaling and that, journaling and mixed media, I like to break the rules. But professional work, no, I follow specific directions. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat the same thing on this side, and let's see. I'm not going to wet the paper first though. Actually, yeah, I am going to wet the paper first, especially on this side. So this is raw right over here. So the cerulean blue, and if you're watching this series, you may be wondering why I changed the brushes from the Fusion from the previous segment to the soft grip. Now the Fusion are very soft, and I prefer using those when I'm working with watercolors. The soft grip have a bit more spring to them, which is more suitable for acrylics, but it doesn't matter. You can use either one. I also have the Majestic brushes, which are very soft, but I reserve those for specific things that I paint. As long as you've got good brushes, you'll be fine. But there are some times where I have like these really grungy brushes. It's when these brushes break down, I don't throw them away. I keep them for other stuff. I don't throw away my brushes. And even the brushes that have are not usable, I will incorporate them into a piece of art, either as a binder for a journal. I'll use them as in the spine for my journals, for my bookbinding. That's absolutely stunning. I love that. I love that. Okay, let's hit that with the heat gun now. There we go. Now this one here, I'm just going to pad ever so lightly on the edges. Because what you're going to be left behind, because acrylics is more solid, is I don't want a ridge of paint. It doesn't matter for really, if you want that effect, that's fine. For me, I didn't. But you see, because it's permanent, it didn't wipe out. If I would have done this with the watercolors, it would have lifted everything up. Okay, so we're getting there. Now, depending on how many layers you put on here, at this point when it's semi-dry, you can take a baby wipe or a Clorox wipe and start wiping back some of the paint, and it'll give you a really nice distressed look. Because I did this on white, I don't want to be left with pure white. So when I do the next layer, then I'll do some wiping back. And I'm just going to do this just to speed it up. Okay. That's still a little bit damp, but now this is fused into the paper. That's it. There's nothing that's going to pull this up. Okay. Where you're on the gesso part though, the gesso does act as a little bit of a resist. Now let me just show you. It also depends how much gesso you put down, how long the acrylic has to dry. So what I'm gonna work here because it's a little bit thicker, and you can wipe back some of the areas a little bit to get it back to the white. Okay, so see this here? And you just wipe that back a little bit. Just a little bit of the paint comes off. Let's see if I can get a really good close-up. My camera goes into a tizzy when I try to do something really, really close. See? So if let me try here. You have to do it where the paint is dry, okay, but it hasn't had full time to dry. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense. It needs to be dry, but not totally dry, where it hasn't cured yet. There we go. See how I can lift that up? This, you can't do this here. I can wipe and wipe and wipe and wipe. Nothing's going to happen because the paint has actually set inside the paper. There's no resist. The gesso acts as a sealer to the paper, making the surface a little bit smoother, and you can wipe out a little bit more, but once the paint has set and cured, you won't be able to lift it off. Okay, There we go. You want to, timing is everything when it comes to this technique of wiping off. And look how distressed that looks. I love, love, love this look. Let's see if I can get a little bit more here. Because all you're doing is wiping the paint off the gesso. And you can see some parts where the gesso, I missed the gesso. There's no gesso here. So I was taking the brush and really doing something rough. How beautiful is that? Okay, let me turn this around. Ooh, I should have taped my craft mat down. Now I'm doing this, now again, if you're following the series, that's great. But I'm painting, doing everything on a Ranger no stick craft mat because, well, nothing sticks to it. But it is a bit cumbersome because I didn't tape it down. See the differences? I can't wipe this down. And if I just keep doing this and doing this and doing this, I will actually be pulling up the fibers of the paper. So that's the huge difference. Same technique, watered down acrylics on raw paper and watered down acrylics. This is the raw paper and this is a scrubbing of gesso. And this is still the Strathmore Visual Journal that I'm using, which is called my Book of Backgrounds. It'll be full of backgrounds. And then when it's finished, I will take the pages out of this book and use them in my expanding journal where I will build journal pages or mixed media art based right on top of these pages. Okay, now I'm going to work with another layer, and depending, and you can switch it up a little bit. It doesn't really matter how you do the layers. Typically you go from light to dark. Now the blue gray, and I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, why did I pick this color? And I know why I picked the color. And it's going to be for the simulation of coral, but it's too dark, so I'm going to pull in a little bit of white. Now this here, I don't want the paper to be wet. I'm going to do it backwards, so usually I go from here and I run it down, but this time I'm going to put it here and I'm going to run it this way, because if I want it to look like coral, coral will grow up from the ground. Yeah, that's about right. So I'm going to spray only the bottom and place this on quite heavily. Okay, let's just get this started this way. I'm going to do only one page first. And let's just get a bit more water in here. I'm going to put a little bit of cerulean blue in there. It'll be less gray. I'm just scraping the brush off here, but see how that's, I'm going to pick a little bit of phthalo blue in there. And just doing that in some spots. Okay, take your Mr. Bottle. And go like that. And stop. Okay, if I wanted this part to be a little bit higher, what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll do the same thing here. Okay, try not to lift this higher because I don't want this to run off the page. Okay, put a little bit of water and just use the Mr. Bottle to push the paint out. Now this can be a little bit tricky. I got a lot of pigment here. Wasn't missed. Take your heat gun and use your heat gun to push the paint. Try not to push up at the top, just push at the bottom. And see here, the paint's not moving. It doesn't want to move. I'm going to turn that off. I'm just going to mist slightly above it. The paint needs somewhere to go. There we go. Use the heat gun to push, 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 push. See if I can get a branch off this. See, if I want to get a branch off this, that's not going to happen. So all I got to do is I can just mist just beside a little bit. It'll start, the paint will start to kind of flow out this way, and just give it a little bit of help. Nope, it's just too set in its way right there. Okay, I'm not going to let it win. Clean brush with water and just drag. There we go. Just drag. There we go. Oh, I wasn't going to let my journal, or let the paint win. There we go, something like that. And now I'm just going to take a sea sponge, and I'm just going to pad the bottom here, because I got some heavy pigment here, and I'm just padding this. It's just a sea sponge dry, but when you use these dry, you have to put them in water right away, okay? Otherwise the acrylics will dry right in there. Now from here, I can make a few adjustments. I can come back here and bring that in to really do some funky things here. If you want to really spread that stuff out, put lots of water. Now watch. It just goes like this. Let's bring that down a bit more. Okay. And then use the heat gun. I don't want to use the paper because it'll be too strong on lines. And use the heat gun to push the paint back. Get that cord out of the way. And we're just using the heat gun to manipulate the paint. Look how soft that looks. And then let me get my, I'm going to get my baby wipe or my kitchen wipe, and I'm just going to blot up. Because the paint has already dried, I'm not going to, when I do this, I'm not going to remove the whole slew of paint. But now I've got a line here. That's where the other paint was. It's easy enough to fix. Just get something down there. Grab another sponge. And just blot. There we go. I got rid of that line. How cool is that? Beautiful. So with the watercolor, sorry, with the raw watercolor paper, sorry, let me try that again. Take 3. With the raw paper that's down here, this is the Strathmore Visual Journal, so it's a mixed media type of paper. So with the raw paper wet, is that I can have watered down acrylics and get a beautiful gradation look, yet the acrylics will still be detailed enough that I can get specific effects, and then when I wipe it down, if it's had a little bit of time to dry, it's why I use the heat gun a lot. If it's had a little bit of time to dry, then you can do some pouncing in that to further manipulate the paint without everything coming up. Once this is dry, that's it. Nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming out. But I will show you a really cool technique, because I want to, I'm going to stencil something on here where I want to lift up the paint. And I'll show you a really cool technique to do that. Now, for this one here, we're going to do the same thing. Ew, I got paint in my brush. Ugh. Same type of thing. And we're just going to take whatever is left over here. It's no big deal. The key, water. And I'm going to mist on this side. Mist on the sides as well. I don't think I did that last time. And I'm just going to tilt the book up a little bit. bit too much water. You want to get the paint down first before it starts to spread. And scrape the brush so you'll make sure you get paint right to the very edge. And there you go. Let's tilt this a little bit. If you're doing it on a double spread the way I am, where page and page, make sure this is dry so you don't lose the effect. Okay, I don't want this to go any further this way, and this isn't quite high enough, but you know what? I'm liking what that looks like, so I may leave that. Leave that. So if I can manipulate the paint right here. It's like watching paint dry. And I'm watching this one here, and that's it. I'm going to stop. And that's actually not too bad because it looks like it's growing right out of the page. So that's okay. That's okay, I'm going to leave that. Get the heat gun, and you can push it a little bit further. Don't put the heat gun on there too long though, because what you don't want to do is burn the paper. I'm just manipulating the paint back. Okay, not very long. So I'm pushing it back, pushing it back, pushing it back. And I can just spray a little bit more, have it look like it's just spidering, see? It'll search for water. Now in here it's not moving, so I'm going to spray just above it being here. And then tilt that, and there it goes. Wow, this is really neat. I'm not liking that dot that's there, so I can put in a little bit more paint. There we go. That's that dot of paint. That's a fingerprint right here. The staining factor will be stronger on the raw paper, and whereas on the gessoed stuff, the gesso, it's like it almost repels it. But look at that. So the raw paper part is a much more soft blending, but you can still have some detail, whereas the gessoed part, very, very hard lines. But again, I didn't wet this, okay? When this is completely dry, then what I'm going to do is wet the entire piece, do the technique again with different colors because I want to have it look like the depth, where I'm looking deep into the distance, and you usually do that with lighter, cooler colors in the background, and as elements come closer, they're warmer and darker. So I'm going to be doing another set of like coral type of effects with a darker color. And I'm going to put water over everything, but then I'm also going to show you how to do a lift out on the raw paper, because I know for a fact you can't lift this paint out because it's set right into the paper. You can't lift it out. But I'll show you a technique, what you can do to get around that. Okay, so this is going to take, because this is pretty thick here, I'm going to wait about 5 minutes for this to dry, and then we come back, we'll continue on. Okay, this is all dry now, and I brought out 2 stencils, a bristle brush, and some masking tape. Oh, and the secret product is Traditions Multi-Surface Sealer. Now you may be saying, wait a minute, don't you usually put sealer on top of raw paper or wood, then you paint on top? Yeah, you can, but you can also use this to act as a resist. Okay, so we can put this on top of this here, and we can let it dry. Then we can paint on top of it with something else. The paint will stick everywhere else except where this is. Okay, because we're not gonna let it dry. We're gonna rub it out right away. Well, it's tacky. Let's see, where am I? And I brought my grungy number 8 bristle brush to stamp roughly inside the stencil, and masking tape to hold the stencil in place. Now the stencils I'm using, where's the name of these? I write the names on all my stencils with a Staedtler Lumicolor Permanent Special. It has to be the special because it's absolutely permanent on almost all surfaces. So this is Floral Breeze. These are Decoro stencils. Floral Breeze. This is Spiral Scroll, and I can choose. Let's see. I can choose how I want these to be. And with this one here, I'm not going to bother with this one. And I'm going to have to, I'm just going to tape it down, only because the stencil goes past the, it's along the edge. It's just to help me just a little bit, because I usually end up making a mess. This one's fine. And I'll just do that. Okie dokie smoky. Gonna shake this up, and I tap the bottles because it sends the medium back inside. Dry bristle brush, not wet. Okay. And we're going to paint that. Now make sure, if you can, that the stencil is flush. Whoopsie. The stencil is flush against the paper. That's why I like to pounce, because I'm actually pushing the stencil down. This also works great with homemade stencils. I wish DecoArt would come out with a kit where you could make your own stencils, like the material, or an easy to cut material or something like that. The stencils that now this is where I'm talking about here, just pressing it down. I mean, I make stencils out of so many different things, but I like this stuff because it's so easy to clean. It's so easy to clean. I have bought other product. There's another manufacturer that has a thing where you can cut a stencil. I don't like the way it works. I'm not very good with an X-Acto knife. That's why I prefer just making my own stencils out of random blue box items. Actually, I'll go right to the outside edge on this. That's fine. Make it look like it's going outside. I know there's a bit of a glare here, so just ignore that. Can't do anything about that. And I'm putting a lot of the sealer on here. It will seep underneath the stencil, and it might kind of go out a little bit. It doesn't really matter if I get precise detail lines, because this is still in the background. Might as well use it all up. There we go. Okay, this in water. And what I'm going to do now is, to let these dry, I'm going to take the stencils off, and I'm going to go right to my laundry tub, clean these off right away, because I don't want the multi-surface sealer sticking on the stencil. Okay, so when we come back, this will be dry, and then I'll show you how to do the layers and wipe out the paint with this type of resist. Alright, I'm back. Okay, so let's see if I can see, I'm tilting it, you can see a little bit of the shine there. Okay, so now what my goal is to put a very, very transparent wash of paint over this whole thing, and let it somewhat dry, and then come in with a kitchen wipe. You can use a baby wipe too, and wipe down the areas. And what's going to happen is that the paint that I'm putting on now will be wiped out in this location. Okay. So I'm just going to use a large brush. The actual brush you use doesn't really matter as long as it's a big brush. I look at the size of these. I don't care about the numbers or whatever, but I look at the size of the bristles. But for those that want to know the actual brushes that I'm using, I am listing them at the end of the video. I'm going to take a little bit of phthalo blue. I rarely use phthalo blue whole because it's so intense. Okay, and I'm going to spray. I could use the extender and blending medium, but I don't want to extend the drying time. A bit more pigment. I'm going to do this one with blue and this one with phthalo green, just to get something different. Ooh, you don't want to get any white in that. Okay, let me move this down. Hang on a second. You do not want to get any white paint in with this layer. So I'm going to move this down here. I've many times, especially for something like this, I've taken the phthalo blue, phthalo green, and transparent red iron oxide, my favorites, and I've put them into a mister bottle. But with doing that, because the acrylics will dry very quickly, you need to almost clean the bottle out every time you use it. Okay, so that's with the blue. I'm going to let that dry for a bit. Now I'm going to do the same thing with green. Green again is another color that I very rarely use whole without mixing it into something else. It's mega bright. You know what? I'm looking at it and there's some white in there. My brush was dirty. So I'm going to wipe up my brush because I went into dirty water. Phthalo green is, I'm going to go into clean water to get that. There we go. Phthalo green is extremely potent. I have a habit of anytime I use phthalo colors, I end up with some of it on me. So I'm going to go closer to the table because I'm wearing my good summer pants. And at the same time, I'm wearing an apron and it's so hot in here. The heat wave is starting again. Now you can see those lines, it's sort of repelling. Same with here, it's repelling. But we can actually wipe some of that out. I'm going to go with a little bit of a deeper green here. But you can tell the different look when you're using the raw paper. Doesn't seem to be as luminescent. But that's okay, sometimes you may want to have that type of look. Okay, so let's see. This one you can really see it. This one's getting there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm not drying this to the whole thing. I'm just basically, first of all, just setting it. Because I will be able to wipe it back. But if I take a kitchen wipe and go over this, if I touch anything here, it'll come up, especially where the gesso is. So I just want to set this. And I'm just doing this just to speed things up. Okay, same thing here. This one is very, very apparent. Go. Nothing left here that's wet. Okay, so it's a little bit, still not quite dry. And now if I really want to further pull this out, now I have to look at the monitor because I can't see. And I can just pull that out a little bit more. See? Where's the rest of it? Up here. Now this is where the paper's raw. And look how easy that came up. Okay, where is there another one? I know there's some down here somewhere. Oh, there we are. There we go. And this one here is dried. This one here, I think I wiped out some of the multi-surface sealer. I was getting impatient for the drying. There we go. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So you have to let it dry, like 100% have to let it dry. Yeah, that's cool. There we go. Awesome. This one here, don't have to do much. This one's very easy to see because there's no glare. And all I'm doing is I'm just going right back over the lines. There. Beauty. So there's a resist that you can use with the multi-surface satin. Now to further intensify this, you can then switch it now to go with more phthalo green on this side and phthalo blue here. So what color do I have? I have phthalo green in my brush. And it'll just deepen up. It'll just deepen it up even more. Okay, see, it just makes it even more intense. So definitely, this will be an amazing underwater scene here, and I can think of so many other different things that I could do with this. I'm gonna get paper towel now, because this one here I won't even have to wait. There we go. Just put that back here. And I'm just feathering out the edges because I want it to look like it's kind of going like this. No hard edges. There we go. And now the opposite on this side, but you can see the difference between using the gesso, because you can get many layers, and then this is here on raw paper and it just kind of sinks in. It stains the paper. I prefer working on something that's got gesso on it. So you can't even wipe it down too much because it sets right into the paper. Look at that. Wow. That looks amazing. A little bit more water here. Just going to tint that so it's not so blue. Just fade it out. we are. That's it. Oh, my microphone got caught there. Sorry about that. If you hear it a Now, I also, I don't edit out any mistakes in this. I also won't be doing any extreme fast forwards on this because I want you to see everything, okay? And I'm just seeing a line here. I'm just kind of fading that out. See, if you're more advanced, you can always fast forward. But the problem is if I edit stuff out, like this is where I am, and come back and it's finished, beginners don't know how I got there. So it's just easier to include everything, and you guys can fast forward if it's too basic for you. Gorgeous. This is absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful. Absolutely love it. So there you go. So now we have another spread done with the gesso. Here you can see the gesso. You can do a lot more distressing with it. You can really grunge it up. And I find that with the gesso here, because it's more of a slicker surface, I find the paints are a little bit more luminescent. Whereas this one here on raw paper, I find that it's more of a gradation look, almost like an airbrush. Okay, and with the multi-surface satin on both, the multi-surface satin as a resist is a lot more apparent on here because you're putting that on raw paper. Okay, that's why it's more apparent on here. And on this one here, it's very apparent here, but you can see here it's not so much because it's got the gesso and then the other layer of acrylics. But how gorgeous is that? And when you do backgrounds like this, like with the book of backgrounds, like I'd have to count the pages. I'm going to film a spread on every video, and a spread is 2 facing pages. Once you're done these, you can cut them out and then use them as a background for an actual painting. So you can do a portrait, or a pet portrait, or people portrait, or paint an abstract, or do a mixed media on these, because these backgrounds are obscure. They're not specific. They don't have any specific elements. So you can paint any type of centralized object, a floral still life, an apple or whatever. These backgrounds are great for that. Okay, and you can also use them as a background for your art journaling. All right, so we have this spread, and then we have this. And if you are going to be using it in your art journal, I do have a video available on my blog to show you how you can bind a single sheet into your art journal. It's called my expanding journal technique. So there we go, another spread done. So join me next time where I do another spread, and again I'll be doing it with the watercolors and then the acrylics, just to give you an idea of both. And I'll be bringing in additional products, so that way you can see what you can do with certain things, more stenciling, dry brushing, washes, glazing, and all that stuff. And so you can learn something about a specific product technique, and then you can learn something about how to incorporate that into a design. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and you feel free to visit me on my blog at artplace.ca to see all my other videos and tutorials, or join our free art journaling group at creativeartjournaling.com. Until next time, stay inspired.